Now, I am delighted to welcome on stage a scientist who has a passion for space. Back in 2011, she began to realize her dream and started her journey on becoming a space explorer. She is co-chair of Humanities at the International Space University's 201 Space Studies programme. Niamh is one of Ireland's leading science communicators and STEAM, as STEM now is, specialists, and she's very passionate about what she does. So will you please welcome Dr. Niamh Shaw.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anton. And it's lovely to have people joining us remotely as well today. So yeah, I'm Niamh, and I want to talk to you today about my moonshot, which I think is apt when we're talking about space. So a moonshot is defined as a plan or an aim to do something that seems almost impossible. And I don't believe what I'm trying to do anymore is actually almost impossible. I think it is actually possible in the day and age that we have with space. But I'd like to kind of take you through my journey and help you understand why this dream is important to me. So I've been sitting in the back all afternoon listening to some amazing pitches, some high tech, and some seriously competent people who are really engaged in science and engineering and maths and technology, which we call STEM. I'm really lucky with my job that I get to go out and I get to talk to lots of different people, particularly in schools and family events and science events and all sorts of things. And what I have found is that I'm very lucky in that I grew up in a house where communicating science was one of the most basic things that we did. We were all nerds. We loved science fiction and we loved science, and we watched David Attenborough's programs, and we watched Cosmos with Carl Sagan. And the more I do my job, the more I realize that I'm really lucky that I had that start. And I think if we want to have a future where we have lots of space and we'll have lots of tech, I have a lot of work to do to try and engage all those people that I've met that don't necessarily have as strong a connection with STEM as I do. And I think space is the answer. And I actually think if I go to space, I'll really crack it. Because I think sometimes you need to see somebody do something mental and crazy in order to kind of shift your perception of what we are allowed and not allowed be. And that's my moonshot. I want to go to space as a reporter, as a communicator, as a storyteller. But also I really want to go to space because I've been sitting in rooms and halls and classrooms with people for the last 8 years. And if I get to space, if I spend my 2 weeks on the International Space Station or even on the moon, I'll go back to those schools and those halls and those exhibition spaces, and I'll continue the conversations that I started. Conversations that I had with people about, what do you want to do with your life? What do you want to be? And maybe if they see me achieve something crazy, like spending 2 weeks on the International Space Station as a communicator and educator, maybe I might shift their perception of what they are allowed and not allowed do. Because I'm a woman from Ireland and we have a growing and emerging space industry, but we haven't yet got a real Irish astronaut. Yesterday there was an announcement from the European Space Agency about this new cohort of astronauts, and I was really hoping that one of the reserve people would be from Ireland, and we're not there yet. So it would be incredible to have somebody do that for Ireland, for the European Space Agency. And so I've been chugging along for the last 8 years, doing my thing as communicator and educator. And I've had a few wins along the way. So let me tell you about some of the wins, and let me then go back to where my story begins, back in 2011. So this is Joseph Aschbacher, and yesterday afternoon, he's the Director General, and yesterday afternoon, he's the guy that announced the astronauts, the candidates. We have 5 career astronauts, and I think we have a reserve of about 11 or so. And they contacted me, the European Space Agency contacted me last March, and they said, we want to give you an award, Niamh. And I was like, me? An award? And they said, yeah, we want to thank you for your work in promoting space and using it as an education tool. And I was really, really chuffed because, you know, what I do sometimes you wonder, is anybody listening? And yes, they are, because I'm trying to get them to get me to go to space as a communicator and as an educator to spend 2 weeks up on the International Space Station. And then another win was, this is a photograph back from December 2013. And this is Chris Hadfield. He's a Canadian astronaut, and he's kind of a hero of mine because when he was on mission on the International Space Station, he tweeted about Ireland, and we were like, oh my gosh, it's amazing, look at it. And when he came back down in March 2013, that Christmas he came to Ireland to sign books, and I was in the queue. And it looks like he actually let me take this picture, but he didn't. I literally just shifted my body in and photobombed myself into it because I had spent many times trying to make contact with him, and he was just too busy. And then this summer, ta-da! UCD Fest. There I was standing on stage, and I got to have a conversation with him on stage. And if you'd have told me that 8 years ago or 6 years ago, I never would have believed it. So these are some of my wins. And then another win is that I'm probably officially now foreign national media at NASA to cover a lot of any of the ESA launches of our astronauts. So, up until quite recently, and for the next maybe 10 years or so, we are still going to be sending astronauts here, this big satellite called the International Space Station. And once the pandemic lifted, I've been going back and forth to NASA. I think I've made 4 trips in the last year. This is the vehicle assembly building for all us Apollo heads. That's the mission that went to the moon. That's a very, very important building. It's where they put together the Saturn V rocket, and most recently a new rocket that has just returned to the moon. And as we speak, it is orbiting the moon. Yay! I got to cover the launch recently of our latest ESA astronaut who flew to the International Space Station, and that's our female astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti. And I got to see her launch in this amazing capsule, which is called the Crew Dragon, run by SpaceX, and they are contracted to send astronauts to the International Space Station from America. And this was the 4th time that SpaceX had done that for NASA. And as media, I got to see Samantha walk out of this historic building. And again, for people who are interested in space history, this is the same building that our astronauts that first stood on the moon, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and accompanied by Michael Collins, walked out that fateful evening in July 1969. And this is now called the Neil Armstrong Building. And we saw Crew 4 say goodbye to their family and friends, and then they jetted off in their Tesla cars, which is also owned by Elon Musk, who also owns SpaceX and Twitter, but we won't talk about that. And then I was on the media lawn, and I watched Samantha launch to the International Space Station. This is kind of dodgy footage because I'm not a photographer. I go to do these things as a human, and it's all about my experience and sharing that, and then the science comes whenever people ask me questions. So this is my genuine response to my 2nd ever launch that I watched. I say, oh my God, I find when I don't know what to say. So it's not very interesting, I guess, as a reporter to keep saying, oh my God, but that's what I did. So she launched there. And I was live streaming then to the RTE Kids Instagram at the same time.
Are you seeing this? Oh my God.
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 Oh my God. Holy God. Oh my
Yes.
God, that's beautiful. Oh my God, that's absolutely stunning. It's so bright, guys. You've no idea how bright this is. It's like the sun. Oh my God, and that noise. Oh my God.
They're incredible. Launches are really special. You never get tired of them. I mean, I was on the media lawn there at NASA at Kennedy Space Center, surrounded by, all these amazing photographers who've devoted their life to photographing launches, and they say you never tire of them. I have to get better camera gear, though, I think, to stand up to that. But what I find incredible about launches is that it's this controlled explosion, which was done by humans, and about a couple of thousand people made that moment possible for 4 people to be able to get up to the International Space Station. It's a controlled explosion, and there are 4 people on top of it. And when you're watching it, you can't fathom that. You never think that there's 4 people on top of it because it looks so incredibly dangerous. And yet this has become every day. Aren't we incredible as a species that we dare to defy who we are as a species? We're built and developed and evolved to just live on this planet. But no, that's not enough. We want to go further and beyond. And when we get our brains together and we work collectively, we're able to figure out how to make that happen, how to keep people alive in an environment where there's no oxygen, there's no atmosphere, there's no food, there's no water, and we keep them safe and have been doing so for over 50 years and successfully on the International Space Station for over 22 years. It's unfathomable. And the other launch I saw happened again. I went and followed the launch of another astronaut from the European Space Agency. I was in this building, and I'm going to tell you why shortly when I go back. But I wanted to show you this other launch as well. And I was on a break. This is the Astronaut Centre at the European Space Agency. And when the astronauts are in training there, they show you what's going on in real time. And this is a pool right bang in the middle of the Astronaut Centre in Cologne. It's called the Neutron Buoyancy Facility. It's 10 meters deep. And they use it to help astronauts train for when they have to go outside and fix something or repair something or replace something on the International Space Station. They're called spacewalks or EVAs, extravehicular activities. And they're in these spacesuits that are miniature spacecrafts. They're under pressure. They have everything they could possibly need in that spacecraft or that spacesuit, and hence it's extremely heavy. So the best place for them to train is in water. It's the closest thing we have to that sensation of not having gravity on our bodies. And the day that I was there, I was mesmerized by that. And you'll see kind of two people just walking out in white suits. They're in the spacesuits, and they're two astronauts. And one of them is helping the other. He's helping Alexander Gerst, a German astronaut, for his upcoming mission to the International Space Station, which happened in June 2018. And again, I found myself going to Kazakhstan and a city called Baikonur, which again, for our space historians, is just one of the most historic places in terms of space history. It's the place where the very first person launched into space, Yuri Gagarin, the first woman launched into space, Valentina Tereshkova, the first dog that launched into space, Laika. We won't talk about that, he died of heat exhaustion, God love him. And I was in a city, a Russian-governed city in the middle of Kazakhstan, watching these three people launch. And these are my photographs up close to them. And on the very right, we have Alexander Gerst, our German astronaut, who I've since met. In the middle, we have our Russian astronaut from Roscosmos, Sergei Prokofiev. And then on the left, we have our NASA astronaut, Serena Onion-Chancellor. And then after they got in the bus and headed to the launch pad, we all headed to the middle of the steppe desert. And we got a really up-close view of launches, because when you see launches in Baikonur, you're not as far away. So my footage shouldn't be as bad as it was on the night of that other launch. But again, I got so excited, I forgot to keep track of my camera. And I do say, oh my God, again.
Oh my God.
So my camera's shaking because the ground is shaking. And I stood in that field. And there's a lot of superstition and custom when you see launches in Baikonur. You can't speak until you hear on the tannoy that they've safely made their way. That the separation of the rocket from the capsule has happened, and they're making their way to the International Space Station. So I just wanted to scream, because the force of these rockets, when the ground shakes, you feel it in your body. You feel energized. And again, you can't believe that there are three people. The Soyuz spacecraft is slightly smaller than the Crew Dragon capsule, and I just couldn't believe again that there was three people on top of that rocket, and it's unfathomable. So my camera work was appalling, and so I just gave up. I forgot, because all I wanted to do was just see them go up, and they're gone in seconds. These things happen like in seconds. It's over, And then another win is right around the time that I get my media license, we're going back to the moon. And the Artemis mission is kicking off in earnest. And the Artemis mission, in terms of mythology, Artemis is the sister to Apollo. So obviously we're going to follow on from that. And this is just a schematic of the solar system. It's not to scale. The planets are much further apart than that. But if we look at it, and we look at the furthest we've been as humans, the furthest we've ever been is to the moon. And it takes 2 to 3 days to get to the moon. But we want to do more. There's these 100-year strategies by agencies all around the world. We want to go to Mars. We want to go to Mars because we want to understand what happened to Mars. Mars is once considered to be a planet very similar to ours. We know from looking at the landscape that it had rivers and streams and it had an atmosphere, but something happened for it to change, and we need to understand why. And so we've spent the last 22 years looking at what it's like for astronauts to survive just orbiting Earth, just 400 kilometers above us in what we call lower Earth orbit. And we've learned a lot and we understand more, and now it's time to go back to the moon. And so the next step is to develop a new space station called the Gateway, and then to start to build buildings and structures on the surface of the moon using the regolith, or the topsoil of the moon, to protect us from radiation, because there is no atmosphere up there to protect us. And all of this is to help us understand how, again, we dare to defy who we are as a species to go to another planet, which will take between 7 months to 2 years minimum. And it starts with this rocket. It started with this rocket. And that started 18 years ago. And 10,000 people were involved in building that rocket and managing that rocket and making that launch happen. It happened last Tuesday night. And this is the rocket here, me standing in front of it. And I was there on St. Patrick's Day to watch it roll out from the infamous Vehicle Assembly Building. And I was also there as it went past me. And I want you to, I put this video up because look how small the people are in relation to the size of the rocket. It's incredibly big. And it has to be that big because we have to get to the moon. Oh my God, there we go. I should have it on my t-shirt. Oh my God. And I was invited back, so that was March 17, and then I was invited back to follow the actual launch. It was a big deal. August 29th, we were due to launch this rocket, and there was no people in it, but it was full of sensors. There were spacesuits on board. There was satellites on board, sensors to determine how we can make sure that when we put humans on this rocket in the next mission, that we will understand everything. It was a big deal. I don't know if there's any Marvel fans out there, but Chris Evans, Captain America, was there. The Red Hot Chili Peppers were there to sing. We had the Vice President there. It was a big deal, and we were all waiting and waiting and waiting. But there's not always wins in space, and there's not always wins in life either. And so we waited all night, and they started to experience leaks in that central tank, that orange tank there. And it was supposed to launch between 2 hours, between 8:42 and 10:42, but they ran out of time. So we couldn't, this was the sum total of my footage that night. I got rained on badly. And then they said, come back Tuesday. This was a Friday night, Saturday morning. They said, come back Tuesday. We'll have fixed the leaks by then. So we came back Tuesday, and the same thing happened again. And so that was the second attempt, and it was my last chance to see the launch, even though I'd been writing about it in BBC Sky at Night magazine, and I'd been interviewing people from it for nearly 2 years. So I look really disappointed there, believe you me. But it did launch, and I wasn't there. It launched last Tuesday night. I was in the midst of rolling out many, 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 many events. If I look tired, it's because it was Science Week last week. And it successfully rolled out. And just there on Monday, it got to the moon. And we're getting great readings back. And so we're returning to the moon. Isn't that incredible? I just find these moments incredible. And they sort of fuel me. And they keep me going. And I take these experiences as a reporter. And I bring them back. And I share them. I don't talk jargon, I just talk about how these moments make me feel. And then whether I'm in the room of students, teenagers, or children, or adults, the questions come. And the questions are always scientific. So we get to the STEM. I don't necessarily always have to say, this is STEM. They're naturally curious. We are, as a species, naturally curious. And that's what I'm trying to do, is trying to connect those people with their curiosity. And hopefully that we'll have a future society who are all engaged in STEM. That's the plan. So how did all this happen? Well, it happened from a very young age. From the age of 8, I have been obsessed with space. And unfortunately, I went through a phase where my mother also cut my hair, obviously blindfolded and with a spoon. I was always a logical child. I loved school. You can see there my diary entry is all about my exams. I also used to calculate what time I went to bed at, because at the end of every month I would work out the average time that I would go to bed. And then on New Year's Eve, as you were all popping champagne, what was I doing? I was making a chart of my monthly time of going to bed. I would analyze it. Yes, I was a very adventurous child. But this was the thing. So at 8 years of age, it's the summer of, I think it's 1976, 1977. I'm 8. I'm living in Carlow, and whenever we didn't have school, I never knew what to do with myself. So my dad set me a task. He said, I want you to make a comic about your favorite planet, which was Saturn at the time. And we had the encyclopedia, and I opened the Encyclopedia Britannica. And for those people who are younger than me, the encyclopedia is effectively Google in a book. And I saw it, and I said, oh yeah, well, when I grow up, I'm going to stand on the moon, and I'm going to see that. And that was it. It was just, that was the decision I made at 8 years of age. And I wish it was that simple. I wish, all of us were able to hold on to those dreams that we have as kids, because I really believe that they're the essence of what our passions are. But by the time I got to secondary school, I could not figure out how someone like me, and this is what I would say to myself, from Dundalk, could possibly have a career in space. It would never even dawned on me that that was possible. And the people I've met, Irish people who work in the space sector, they either went to the Kennedy Space Center as kids, or they wrote to an astronaut, or they had family already involved in the space sector. So I just couldn't see anyone in my line of sight. So that's why I want to be as visible as possible. So I looked back on this at a moment in my life when I had stepped away from being a scientist, and I had pursued my creative side, and I thank the Lord that I did. I was performing as an improviser and working with incredibly talented people in theatre. And they really liked the idea that I was this engineer and scientist who also wanted to express myself as a writer and as a theatre maker. And my first show that I made was this show, and it was about particle physics and trying to figure out why is it that I seem to be the only person who wants to do something mad like go to space, but everybody else is kind of they know what they want to be. And so I looked at all the different possible outcomes of my life, and I really wanted to explore the person. I'll just let that go. I really wanted to explore the person that wanted to be an astronaut, and I thought I'd let it go. I thought it was fine. I thought, yeah, it's just something I say at parties. And I contacted the European Space Agency, and I asked them if I could borrow a flight suit, because I wanted to make a video as if I was an astronaut. And so we made this video. We lined up loads of science fiction movies that I wanted, and we just pressed play. And it was really funny, and it was going to be a light-hearted part of the show. But a really interesting thing happened, which I didn't expect. I really started to feel uncomfortable after this crazy phase, obviously. I started to feel really uncomfortable in the suit because I realized that I was never going to be an astronaut.
And how do I feel in the suit? I feel more sad. It feels very real that I'm not an astronaut.
So I had a moment of clarity. I had a moment, and that was it. That was 2011, and that was it. So I had a choice. Do I risk it all and spend the rest of my life trying to figure out how far I want to take this? Or do I pretend that I don't care that deeply about actually pursuing what I really always wanted to do? And I decided I'd risk it all, because I knew I'd always feel deep down that I didn't bet on myself. So that's what I'm doing. I'm betting on myself. And 2 years later, I had to sit on it, and 2 years later I walked into Blackrock Castle Observatory and I said, I want to see what happens when I say to the world that I'm a woman in my 40s from Ireland, a country that doesn't have a full-fledged space sector. I want to see what happens when you're, as a woman in your 40s, you're not supposed to change career. I want to see what happens when you actually pursue the thing that you wanted to do when you were 8 years old. I want to go to space, not as an astronaut, but as an artist, as a communicator, as a reporter, as a writer, as somebody who wants to have a human experience and share with everyone. Not just to say, I'm the first. No. To do it so that I can help other people figure out and be brave enough to confront the thing that they know is really important to them, the thing that's at the back of their mind, that they've forgotten is their hobby or their pastime. But to me, I had to go for broke and risk it all. And it was mad. In 6 weeks, I was there, back at this picture at the Astronaut Center in Germany. And I thought if I just made a theatre show about it, it would go away. And that was 2014. And it just kept growing. I was asked to do the show at the Edinburgh Fringe, so I gave it to the Edinburgh Fringe. And it never stopped growing. I got offered, I got a scholarship from the European Space Agency to study at the International Space University, where I'm faculty now in humanities. And one of the things that helped me actually was space, which is kind of space. My dream to go to space actually helped me figure out how to drop all the stories that I told myself, these perceptions of ourselves, these walls we build about, you're not allowed to do that, you're not supposed to do that with your life. So I challenge it in myself, and I say, why not? And it was actually looking at the scale of the universe that helped me. That was the first step forward. So if we look at this planet, this beautiful blue marble of Earth, and our place in the solar system. So we're there. We're there right now. So, like, we're in this room in Croke Park, right? And we know that we're somewhere in North Dublin. And when we close our eyes, we know what the room is and we know what Dublin is. And we know if we look at a map of Ireland, we know where Dublin is in Ireland. And then if we zoom out, we know where Ireland is in Europe. And we know where Dublin is in Ireland in Europe. And we know where Croke Park is in Dublin in Ireland in Europe. And if we zoom out, when we see Earth, we're there. We're always on Earth. So we're always in space. And Earth is in the solar system, so we're in the solar system. And we're also, here's another schematic of the solar system. And then we're also in this picture. This is a picture of us on our neighboring stars. And we're also in this picture, in the Milky Way, which is 100,000 light years in diameter. A light year is just a measure of distance. It's just 10 trillion kilometers, just. And we're in that picture. And we're in Croke Park. And we're in that picture. And we're also in this picture, a local galactic group, a group of other galaxies, and that's grouped into a Virgo supercluster, which is grouped into a local supercluster, and there are 55 superclusters that make up everything we currently know. So right now, we're in that picture, the observable universe, which the edge of which is 46.6 billion light years from us right now. When I started getting that into my head, I went, oh, okay, so I'm alive for like that. And so I'm the person that's stopping myself. Nobody else. I'm stopping myself. So that was it. Risked it all. And I went then, I just started getting myself completely out of my comfort zone. I went here to Utah in the desert because they have a facility there called the Mars Desert Research Station. And it's where scientists go who are particularly interested in practicing their methods, particularly geologists and astrobiologists. These are people that study how things can live in extreme conditions. I went with this group of people, and I spent 15 days there living as if we were on Mars, which means every time we went outside, we wore kind of fake suits, and we had a set amount of water, and we had a set amount of food, and we conducted experiments. And it was like living in a garage, really, for want of a better word, except when you'd go outside, you'd wear this helmet. Or it was like being on a really bad caravan holiday when it's raining and you're stuck inside with your family and you've no food. That's kind of what it was like. But when you suited up, the stakes went up a little bit because it was extremely dangerous when you wore that suit, even though it was homemade. And I had a fear of heights, and I got over my fear of heights. I was driving quad bikes. But what was really interesting was by the time those 15 days had finished, I had completely changed my perception of what I needed. I went home to the apartment and I realized all the stuff that I owned, I had no attachment to anymore, so I just gave it all away. And I downsized my life, and I started moving forward. I wrote about this mission kind of inspired me to write my third play. I'll just show you some stills from that as I'm talking. But one of the most important things that it did was it helped me go big. It helped me dream even bigger, and it helped me make one step closer to it. So I now live in Strasbourg, but I have actually been on the road since June. I live out of kind of 2 suitcases and always have. And then I have these moments from time to time where I go, yeah, it's going to be okay. I'm going to move forward. I've leaned on my creativity. I've risked it all. I've dreamed big. And every single time I go to a launch, every single time I report in BBC Sky at Night magazine, every time I get up to speak, every time I'm on the radio, every time I'm on the television, I feel I'm making one step closer to getting to the International Space Station to be a reporter or a storyteller or an educator or a communicator, and then maybe to the moon one day. Because I think there's a need for people to see how difficult it is to live in space and work in space without oxygen, without food, without all the things that we take for granted, and how difficult it is to actually move around in the absence of gravity. And I'll do it all. I'll be scared, I'll cry, I'll vomit, I'll go, oh my God, a ridiculous amount of times. I'll do that because I believe in it, and I believe that long term I can help people shift their perception of where science is in their lives. And the very last video I want to show you is this was in the Steppe Desert, just after I saw that launch of Alexander Gerst. And it just gives you an idea of what happens to me after I see these things.
Just saw the launch. It was amazing.
got me really upset. I'm not really sure why. I think it's because it's incredible to think that there was 3 people up in that, and that it was so controlled, and it's such a feat of ability to be able to do it, and also I wanted to be me one day, and seeing it. I never thought I'd see a launch. I never thought I'd be in Baikonur, and here I am. So it sort of feels like I'm on this path, and that I'm doing it, like I'm actually doing it.
Yeah. You just got to keep moving. You know, be scared, feel the fear, and do it anyway. And I really believe if you have a passion, it just drives you forward. So I leave you with that. Dream big, guys.
On over, Niamh. Grab a seat. There was one bit of phraseology that I was intrigued by where you said, your father asked you to do a project on your favorite planet, which at the time was Saturn. That suggests that in the intervening years, your view on the planets has changed. What's your current favorite?
I think Mars. I think Mars is my favorite now. Yeah.
Right. Are you fully committed, or may that change again as
It
time
might
goes
change
on?
again.
Okay.
It might change again.
The other thing I wanted to ask about was you described being 440 kilometers vertically on effectively an inflated, I assume, aluminium capsule in the space station. You then pointed out that you have a fear of heights. How do you square the two of these?
This is the thing. I actually overcame my fear of heights on that Mars mission. It's funny. Because I had to. I had to stay with the crew. They were all getting their geology samples, and my job was there as, trying to capture the experience. And they were really good. Like, I bonded really, really well with the crew. And so we never talked about my fear of heights, but they would go down the hill and they would kind of walk up away really slowly to show me how to go up. So, but yeah, I do have a fear of heights. But I've done a parachute jump as well,
The joking aside, one of the things that I'm intrigued by, because I think it fits with the 12 people that we heard from earlier on, is in all of the space programs, one of the things that seems to be a recurring theme is that capacity to commit to achieving that which everybody else thinks is either impossible, impractical, or not desirable. What is it, do you think, in astronauts, in people who run space programs, in the senior people in NASA, what is the thing that makes people, like the 12 that we've heard from earlier, willing to do that which other people aren't?
Passion, an absolute belief that they want to make the impossible possible, that you put people together in a room with the same goal and the same passion. I believe that they can figure anything out. I've seen it time and time again in the space sector.
And does practicality, I don't mean this pejoratively, but does practicality never overwhelm or get in the way? Because a lot of the space program, it has benefits have been derived,
yeah,
but that wasn't the initial goal. In some instances, the initial goal was either exploration or adventure.
But we've always explored. I think what it is, Anton, is as a species, we've always explored. So, in the 1500s, we explored the seas, and Christopher Columbus, he found America, although there were people already there. And so, we always have to know what's over the hill. And, at the turn of the 20th century, it was all about Antarctic. And, you had Scott, and you had Amundsen, and you had Shackleton, and Tom Crean from Kerry, and so I think we have this need to explore and see what lies beyond, and then the benefits come. And what I love about space is that there is so much that we can learn about improving our planet and also how to live more sustainably, because that's what I learned when I was on that Mars mission, was I didn't need anything. My whole perception of my water usage and my energy usage just completely changed. So the answers are there. And the Earthrise picture, the one that I liked when I was 8, when people saw that for the very first time, on Christmas Eve 1968, it kicked off the environmental movement and all these climate activists that we now have. Space makes you see the bigger picture. I don't know what it is, but astronauts will tell you when they look down on Earth that they just see Earth as this fragile, living thing, that we have this atmosphere to protect us, and that there's no countries, there's no boundaries, and we're in it together, and no one is going to come anytime soon.
The other thing I'd like an insight into is, in a lot of the presentations that we heard earlier on, we saw people with brilliant ideas who knew this may be years of ongoing development and commitment to get it to blossom the way that it potentially can. In your own instance, you talked about that sort of road to Damascus moment where you said, I am now going to fundamentally change and embark on something that could take years, if not decades, as the case may be. What insight do you have into the ability to do that? What insight do you have, having now gone through it, into what it takes to do that?
Passion, tenacity, just never giving up. If you believe in something so fundamentally, and I think it has to match your values. It has to match what you fundamentally believe to be what life is about for you. And I think if it matches your values, I don't think you can give up, because you'll always feel, I wonder what would have happened if, and certainly that's the case for me.
Have you met anybody else who has made similar choices in respect of space? Have you met anybody else who've made similar commitments to the dream?
Yeah, well, you've got Nora Patton here, another Irish person. She's the same. She wants to do something slightly different, but there are many of us. And then there are other people who are STEM advocates around the world, these people who want to promote science, technology, engineering, and maths. And space has this thing that it seems to, people don't seem to be as intimidated about science when it's got a space theme to it. And it has no age limit. So I'm able to share those slides that I just showed you with 2 and 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 60, 70, 80-year-olds. The conversations are different, but they're all curious, and they don't feel like this conversation isn't theirs to have,
Final thing, 11:16 p.m. seems very late for an 8-year-old.
It was a Saturday. I had to check.
Was it?
It was
on the chart, it was an anomaly when you look back at the month.
I think that was very strange, yeah.
Niamh, very interesting and very insightful. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Niamh Shaw.
Thank you.